The story of letters from German women during World War II opens a rare and intimate window into the private world of women who lived through one of the most destructive conflicts in human history, revealing experiences often overshadowed by the grand narratives of battles, leaders, and political decisions. These letters, written by mothers, daughters, wives, sisters, workers, and students, form a deeply human archive of emotion, survival, and reflection, capturing lives shaped by uncertainty, fear, duty, and resilience within a rapidly collapsing society. Unlike official records or propaganda-driven documents, personal letters expose the raw truths of wartime existence, the loneliness of separation, the grinding weight of shortages, the moral confusion of living under a totalitarian regime, and the desperate hope that loved ones would return home alive. Through these fragments of handwriting preserved across decades, one encounters the rhythms of everyday life, queuing hours for bread, repairing damaged homes, hiding in air raid shelters, tending to children in blackout darkness, as well as the emotional turmoil of watching the war expand from distant headlines to their own streets. These letters remind us that women were not merely passive observers of history, they were active participants, bearing the burdens of family survival, community support, and emotional labor while navigating the shifting expectations imposed by the Nazi state and the brutal demands of total war. Many express loyalty or faith shaped by constant propaganda, while others quietly question or rebel against the regime, revealing a spectrum of beliefs far more complex than the simplified portrayals in history textbooks. They document how women struggled with conflicting identities, patriotic citizens urged to support the war effort, guardians of household stability in a collapsing economy, and grieving individuals coping with loss or uncertainty as husbands and sons vanished into distant fronts. As the war intensified, their letters evolved from hopeful encouragements into confessions of dread, exhaustion, and moral reckoning. They describe the terror of nightly bombings, the disorientation of evacuation, and the heartbreak of watching familiar neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Yet they also reveal astonishing resilience, women forming communal kitchens, adopting orphaned children, rebuilding damaged homes with their own hands, comforting neighbors who had lost everything, and forging new networks of support that would shape post-war recovery. In these private correspondences, one finds moments of beauty and tenderness amid devastation. Mothers describing the first spring blossoms after a harsh winter, sisters sharing memories of childhood to stay emotionally connected, young women confiding their dreams for a future they feared might never come. As the war turned decisively against Germany, the tone of the letters shifts again, capturing the disbelief, fear, and confusion of a population facing invasion, occupation, and the collapse of the regime that had shaped their daily lives. Some grapple with guilt or shock as the realities of Nazi crimes come to light, while others focus on the immediate need to protect their families from hunger, violence, and displacement. These letters reveal not only the destruction wrought by war, but also the complicated emotional landscape of individuals who were simultaneously victims of the conflict and, in some cases, participants in a system built on oppression. After the surrender, women's letters reflect a profound transformation: grief for the dead, relief that violence had ended, and a cautious, fragile hope for rebuilding. They describe standing in food aid lines, searching for missing relatives, navigating new political authorities, and reconstructing shattered homes and lives from the ground up. In this post-war moment, women became the central figures in Germany's physical and emotional reconstruction, carrying forward lessons shaped by suffering and survival. The letters, taken together, form a mosaic of authentic human voices, unfiltered, unembellished, and deeply revealing, showing how ordinary women understood and endured a war that reshaped their identities, relationships, and futures. This collection serves not only as a historical record, but also as a testament to the enduring power of personal testimony. It reminds us that behind every event in history are individuals who lived through it with their own fears, hopes, contradictions, and courage. Through their words, we gain a richer understanding of wartime Germany, not as an abstract entity defined by political decisions, but as a society of millions of individual lives caught between ideology and survival. These letters challenge us to confront the complexities of human behavior in extreme circumstances, to empathize without excusing, and to recognize the profound impact that war has on the most intimate parts of life: family, faith, identity, and the fragile sense of what it means to be human. In reading these letters, we discover that the voices of German women during World War II are not merely remnants of the past. They are enduring reminders of the resilience, vulnerability, and humanity that persist even in the darkest moments of history. In the quiet years before the outbreak of the Second World War, the lives of German women were shaped by a complex mix of tradition, expectation, and the sweeping ideological shifts brought about by the rise of National Socialism. The Germany of the 1930s was a nation still recovering from the traumas of the First World War and the economic hardships of the Weimar Republic. Families across the country held on to a fragile sense of rebuilding, socially, economically, and emotionally. Letters written by German women during this time reflect a landscape that, while not untouched by political tension, still carried the rhythms of daily life. Tending to homes, nurturing children, pursuing education, and maintaining relationships. These letters reveal a world that was on the brink of profound upheaval, but few could fully imagine the scale of what was soon to come. Many young women wrote with hope about their futures, even as the shadow of Nazi ideology quietly influenced every aspect of society. The government's emphasis on traditional gender roles framed women primarily as mothers and homemakers, tasked with strengthening the nation by producing and raising healthy children. Yet beneath this rigid framework, personal dreams persisted. Some women aspired to careers in teaching, nursing, or the arts, while others longed simply for stable families after years of economic uncertainty. Their letters often touched on the tension between personal ambition and social pressure, revealing both resilience and restraint. The tone of their writings from this period varies. Some express enthusiasm for the apparent restoration of national pride, while others subtly hint at discomfort with the tightening grip of political control. For young girls especially, school life changed rapidly. Lessons were increasingly infused with ideology, shaping worldviews in ways both subtle and overt. Yet their letters to friends and relatives describe everyday concerns that transcend political context: schoolwork, friendships, budding romantic interests, and family expectations. These glimpses into daily life paint a portrait of normalcy coexisting with authoritarian influence. Even in households where political loyalty to the regime was strong, private correspondence reveals quieter uncertainties, questions about the future, concerns about relatives abroad, and the desire to maintain meaningful connections despite shifting social boundaries. Urban life offered a different picture compared to rural communities. In cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Munich, women described bustling streets, modern cafes, and increasingly regimented public events orchestrated by the state. Rural women, meanwhile, wrote about the steady demands of farm work, community gatherings, and seasonal rhythms that had defined their families for generations. Regardless of location, a sense of national transformation was unavoidable. Public rallies, new organizations, and mandatory community activities brought German women into a system that sought to influence both thought and behavior. Some embraced these changes enthusiastically, seeing them as opportunities to participate in shaping their nation. Others complied outwardly but remained inwardly skeptical, expressing their true thoughts only in letters to trusted confidants. Family roles during this period were both stable and strained. Fathers often worked long hours, struggling to navigate changing economic conditions or new employment structures mandated by the state. Mothers carried the emotional weight of maintaining households and raising children within an increasingly monitored society. Many letters from wives to husbands, especially those who traveled for work, expressed both pride in their families and subtle anxiety about the uncertainty looming over Europe. Women documented community gossip, school activities, and household repairs, but between the lines, one senses the awareness of political tension brewing beyond their control. One recurring theme in these letters is the attempt to preserve simplicity and joy in everyday life. Women wrote about cooking new recipes, tending gardens, sewing clothes, participating in music clubs, and celebrating birthdays. Photographs exchanged with letters captured smiling faces at family gatherings or scenic outings, reflecting moments of peace amid a world shifting toward conflict. Many women tried to shield their children from the harsher realities of politics, focusing instead on love, stability, and small pleasures. These attempts at normalcy highlight the emotional labor women bore even before the first shots of war were fired. Religion also played an important role for many families. While the Nazi state attempted to reduce the influence of churches, many women continued to find solace in faith communities. Letters exchanged within religious circles often speak of prayer, hope, and moral concern about the direction of the country. They reveal a quiet undercurrent of ideological resistance, gentle, private, but deeply rooted. Friendships thrived in this pre-war period, becoming lifelines of emotional support. Women shared recipes, books, and personal advice, and their letters, often lengthy and heartfelt, testified to the importance of connection in uncertain times. Discussions ranged from gossip about neighbors to concerns about the increasingly militaristic atmosphere in schools and youth organizations. Their writings reveal that while not all women openly opposed the regime, many navigated their lives with a blend of compliance, doubt, and the instinctive desire to protect their loved ones. As the 1930s progressed, government propaganda intensified, and women's organizations such as the NS Frauenschaft and the Bund Deutscher Mädel became deeply embedded in society. Some women praised the sense of belonging and purpose these groups offered. Others, however, expressed discomfort with the regimentation and ideological pressure. Letters from mothers often express worry about their daughters' increasing involvement in state-led programs, which stressed obedience, racial ideology, and sacrifice. These tensions simmer beneath the surface of many pre-war letters, reflecting the complex emotional landscape German women navigated. Despite growing political tensions, many German women entered 1939 with hopes for peace. Letters from this year frequently contain lines such as, "May this year bring calm," or "Let us pray that Europe finds reason." Though few could predict the magnitude of the coming conflict, many sensed instability. News from abroad, rumors circulating in markets, and the mobilization of men for training all signaled that change was imminent. The narrative presented in these letters reminds us that life before the war was neither wholly peaceful nor wholly oppressive. It was a delicate balance. Women were managing households, nurturing relationships, and striving for stability in a nation undergoing rapid transformation. Their letters capture the emotional nuance of the era, pride mixed with fear, routine shadowed by uncertainty, and hope entwined with apprehension. They reveal that before the bombs fell and battlefronts emerged, there existed a rich tapestry of daily life marked by human complexity. These writings lay the foundation for understanding the profound changes that would soon reshape every aspect of German society, especially for the women whose voices continue to echo through history in their letters. The outbreak of the Second World War in September 1939 marked a turning point in the lives of German women, whose letters during this period reveal the shock, uncertainty, and emotional disorientation that swept through households across the nation. Even though political tensions had been mounting for years, many women still clung to the hope that diplomacy would prevail. Their letters from the weeks before and after the invasion of Poland are filled with a mixture of disbelief and resigned acceptance, shaped by state propaganda, personal fears, and the instinctive need to protect their families from what was unfolding around them. For many women, the first sign that life was about to change dramatically came with the sudden mobilization of men. Husbands, brothers, and sons were called to report for service, often with little notice. Letters written by wives in these early days reveal the chaos of hurried farewells, meals left half-prepared, children confused by the commotion, and rooms filled with the tension of unspoken fears. Some women wrote of trying to hold back tears to avoid distressing their families, while others admitted privately that the weight of uncertainty was overwhelming. Their words capture a nation bracing for a conflict that few fully understood. Women living in border regions or major cities felt the impact first. Air raid sirens, though infrequent in the beginning, were terrifying reminders that war was no longer a distant possibility. Mothers described shielding their children's ears from the noise, calming them with stories, or turning the experience into a game to prevent panic. Even in places where no bombs fell, the threat was felt deeply. Schools began distributing instructions on emergency procedures, and communities received training on blackout procedures. Letters from this period frequently mentioned the eerie darkness that fell over cities at night, a stark contrast to the illuminated streets that had once symbolized modern German life. Propaganda played a significant role in shaping women's responses. Newspapers and radio broadcasts framed the invasion of Poland as a necessary act of national defense, and state organizations encouraged women to maintain optimism and morale. In public, many complied, but private letters tell a more nuanced story. Some women expressed cautious pride in their nation's strength, believing the conflict would be brief. Others voiced quiet doubts, questioning whether another large-scale war was truly unavoidable. Their words, often carefully phrased to avoid censorship or suspicion, reveal internal conflicts that were rarely spoken aloud. Daily routines shifted immediately. Shops rationed basic goods as the government diverted resources to the military. Although full rationing had not yet been imposed, shortages of certain items became noticeable. Women wrote about long lines at bakeries, rising prices, and the frustration of not knowing when supplies would stabilize. Housewives adapted quickly, stretching ingredients, adjusting recipes, and learning to substitute scarce items with more accessible ones. Letters exchanged among close friends shared tips on food preservation, gardening, and homemade household goods, creating networks of practical support amid uncertainty. Employment also began to change. With the mobilization of men, many women found themselves taking on additional responsibilities in both domestic and professional settings. Some women entered workplaces previously dominated by men, while others increased their workload at home to compensate for absent family members. Their letters expressed both pride in their growing responsibilities and anxiety about the increasing pressure placed upon them. For many, the sudden shift overturned long-held expectations about their roles in society. Children were among the most affected. Mothers described the difficulty of explaining war to young ones who could not grasp its implications. Letters from teachers reveal their attempts to maintain a sense of normalcy in schools, even as lessons became increasingly infused with ideological content. Many women feared for the emotional well-being of their children, worried that the psychological impact of war would shape an entire generation. Some women wrote about older sons longing to join the Hitler Youth in displays of patriotism influenced by propaganda, creating emotional rifts in families that valued peace over political fervor. Transportation became complicated as trains filled with soldiers and supplies. Women traveling to visit relatives or accompany children to safer regions encountered delays, overcrowding, and frequent cancellations. Their letters described tense journeys, packed platforms, and the sight of young men heading to the front, scenes that made the reality of war impossible to ignore. For many women, these experiences marked the moment they realized life would not return to normal anytime soon. Community life shifted as well. Local authorities established emergency committees. Women's groups organized collection drives for soldiers, and neighborhoods met to plan air raid preparedness. While some women found empowerment in these communal efforts, others felt burdened by the endless stream of responsibilities. Letters reveal exhaustion mixed with determination, as German women attempted to maintain cohesion in their communities despite mounting pressures. The emotional toll of separation weighed heavily on women during this time. Letters exchanged between husbands at the front and wives at home became lifelines of comfort, filled with affection, longing, and attempts to remain hopeful. Some women struggled with the unpredictability of military communication, waiting days or weeks for replies that might provide reassurance or devastating news. Their letters during this period are filled with prayers for safety, expressions of loneliness, and reflections on the fragility of peace. As autumn turned to winter in 1939, German women began settling into the reality of wartime life. Although the full devastation of the war had yet to unfold, the earliest months were marked by an unsettling blend of fear and forced adaptation. Many letters from late 1939 and early 1940 reflect attempts to anchor daily life in routines: cooking, cleaning, teaching children, tending to elderly relatives, while acknowledging the undercurrent of dread that touched every aspect of their existence. These early wartime letters reveal the profound emotional and psychological shift that occurred in German households. They show how women tried to navigate fear without surrendering hope, how ordinary tasks became acts of resilience, and how the outbreak of war reshaped the most intimate corners of their lives. Through their words, we gain insight into a society on the brink of transformation, a society in which women were stepping into new roles while grappling with the uncertainties of a conflict that would soon engulf Europe on an unimaginable scale. As the war progressed into its second and third years, the strain on daily life for German women intensified in ways that touched every corner of their existence. Letters from 1940 to 1943 reveal a remarkable blend of resilience, frustration, hope, and quiet despair as women navigated shortages, emotional burdens, political pressure, and the constant fear of devastating loss. What had begun as a conflict many believed would be swift and victorious now settled into a grinding reality that reshaped the rhythm of ordinary life. Through their private correspondence, German women painted a vivid picture of how war infiltrated kitchens, schools, workplaces, streets, and the most intimate aspects of family life. One of the earliest and most profound changes came with rationing. Initially introduced in moderate form, rationing grew steadily stricter as Germany poured resources into the war effort. Women wrote with exhaustion about standing in long queues for basic items such as flour, butter, meat, and soap. They described the frustration of returning home empty-handed after waiting for hours, and the constant mental arithmetic required to stretch limited rations to feed their families. Many letters include creative recipes, substitution tricks, and tips passed among friends, proof of a collective effort to cope despite the growing scarcity. Housewives became experts in improvisation, turning beetroot into jam, stretching a small portion of meat into a week's worth of meals, and repurposing old clothing into new garments for children. Heating and fuel shortages added new layers of hardship, especially during harsh winters. Women wrote about gathering wood scraps, rationing coal, and bundling their children in multiple layers to keep them warm indoors. Some described sleeping in the same room to conserve heat, often turning the situation into a sort of family camping adventure for the children's sake. These letters highlight the emotional labor women carried, softening hardship, hiding fear, and creating moments of comfort in a world growing increasingly cold in both temperature and spirit. Air raids became a defining part of everyday life. Even towns far from major industrial centers were not immune, and women described the way sirens sliced through the night, wrenching families from sleep and sending them scrambling to shelters or basements. Letters often recount the terror of huddling in the dark, listening to distant explosions, or feeling the ground tremble as bombs fell. Mothers wrote with anguish about calming crying children, distracting them with songs, or shielding their ears. Some women described the surreal quiet that followed each raid, the sound of glass underfoot, the sight of smoke drifting into morning light, the eerie stillness that hangs after destruction. These experiences etched trauma into ordinary routines, yet the women continued to rise each morning and piece life back together. Work life also transformed dramatically. With so many men at the front, women stepped into positions in factories, transportation, agriculture, offices, and hospitals. Some felt pride in contributing to the war effort, while others wrote privately about exhaustion, resentment, and the feeling of being stretched impossibly thin. Women now balanced long work hours with household responsibilities, childcare, and community obligations. Letters from factory workers described the relentless monotony of shifts, the constant noise, and the physical toll of unfamiliar labor. Nurses wrote about overcrowded hospitals, the emotional weight of treating wounded soldiers, and the struggle to maintain compassion while facing endless suffering. In rural areas, life centered around farm labor, which grew increasingly demanding as agricultural resources were redirected toward the military. Women wrote about tending fields, caring for livestock, and harvesting crops with limited manpower and outdated equipment. Some letters reveal pride in feeding the nation, others reflect physical exhaustion and frustration with unrealistic production quotas imposed by government officials. The shortage of male laborers led to programs that brought forced laborers from occupied territories to work on German farms. Letters from women in rural regions sometimes mention these foreign laborers, often cautiously, sometimes sympathetically, revealing the complicated, censored, and often morally fraught interactions that defined wartime agriculture. Child-rearing became a Herculean task during these years. Women wrote about children's health problems caused by poor nutrition, overcrowded conditions in shelters, and stress-induced ailments. Schools struggled to maintain normal operations as teachers were drafted, buildings were damaged, or classrooms were converted into makeshift hospitals or administrative spaces. Letters from mothers reveal a deep longing to preserve childhood innocence despite circumstances. They described crafting handmade toys, telling bedtime stories by candlelight during blackouts, and organizing small birthday celebrations with improvised decorations and ration-friendly treats. Relationships underwent immense pressure during this period. Letters between husbands at the front and wives at home became emotional lifelines, yet communication was often sporadic. Women described the agony of waiting for news, the relief of receiving a letter, and the dread that came with long silences. Some women wrote frankly to close friends about marital strain, fears of infidelity on both sides, and the loneliness that settled in the absence of companionship. Others expressed a fierce determination to remain emotionally strong for their families, even as they confronted despair in private. Social life, though diminished, did not disappear. Women continued to gather for sewing circles, church activities, community meetings, and occasional celebrations. These gatherings served as emotional relief, spaces where women could exchange stories, express fears, and support one another. Letters capture moments of laughter, shared meals, and small joys that stood in contrast to the grim backdrop of war. These interactions forged deep bonds that helped many women endure the years that followed. Propaganda intensified as the war dragged on, and women's letters reflect the growing divide between public expectations and private emotions. State organizations urged perseverance, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty, but private correspondence increasingly revealed doubt. Many women expressed fatigue with official slogans and mistrust in promises of imminent victory. Yet their letters also show the complicated reality of life under authoritarian rule. The need to self-censor, the fear of denunciation, and the delicate balance between honesty and caution. Women confided their true thoughts only to their closest inner circles, sometimes using coded language to express dissent. As casualties mounted, grief became a constant companion. Letters from women whose husbands, brothers, or sons had fallen at the front are among the most heartrending. They speak of numbness, disbelief, and the crushing responsibility of raising children alone. Some wrote about struggling to find meaning in their loss, while others clung to faith or duty as a source of strength. In many households, grief was a private burden carried silently amid the ongoing demands of survival. Despite the immense strain, the determination of German women during these years shines through their letters. They adapted, endured, and improvised in the face of challenges that would have seemed unimaginable only a few years earlier. Their words offer a powerful testament to the complexity of wartime life, a world where exhaustion coexisted with courage, hope flickered beside despair, and the mundane tasks of everyday life became acts of resistance against the overwhelming pressures of war. By 1943, the war that once felt distant had come crashing directly into German homes. The tone of women's letters during this period reflects a stark shift, from the weary resilience of earlier years to a profound mixture of fear, grief, and emotional exhaustion. As Allied bombing campaigns intensified and the Eastern Front brought horrific casualties, women across Germany found themselves confronting destruction on a scale they had never imagined. Daily life became a relentless battle for survival, and their letters became both a testimony and a release, a place to pour out the anguish they could not express publicly. Bombings became the defining terror of home front life. Women wrote vividly about the thunderous noise of approaching aircraft, the trembling of walls, and the deafening explosions that shattered entire neighborhoods within seconds. Letters described the chaos of scrambling to shelters with children in tow, clutching documents, keepsakes, or whatever essentials they could gather in moments of panic. Many wrote about losing everything. Homes reduced to rubble, treasured belongings incinerated, and entire streets transformed into smoking wastelands. Some letters recount the heartbreaking experience of returning to a home that no longer existed, sifting through debris for any fragment of their former lives. Mothers struggled immensely during these raids. They described soothing terrified children in shelters, telling stories to drown out the sounds above, and praying that the next bomb would not fall on them. Women wrote of infants screaming uncontrollably, toddlers trembling in their arms, and older children trying desperately to appear brave while clearly shaken. Many mothers confessed in private letters that their greatest fear was not death, but the possibility of their children suffering alone if they themselves were killed. The aftermath of each raid brought scenes too devastating to forget. Women wrote about walking through streets littered with broken glass, overturned carts, collapsed buildings, and the bodies of neighbors they once greeted each morning. In these moments, the lines between civilian and soldier blurred. Every person was now on the front line. Rescue teams of civilians, including women, worked tirelessly to dig survivors from rubble, provide first aid, or retrieve the bodies of the dead. Some women took on roles as volunteer nurses or aid workers, not out of ideological duty, but from the raw human need to help amid suffering. Displacement became a painful reality. Families were forced to flee bombed cities, seeking shelter in rural towns, or staying with relatives. Women wrote about the humiliation of standing in lines to register as refugees, the difficulty of caring for children without stable housing, and the guilt they felt for burdening others. Letters reveal the emotional toll of abandoning homes built over lifetimes, carrying only memories and a few salvaged items. Some women wrote with gratitude about the kindness of rural families who offered shelter. Others described feeling unwelcome or judged, as resources were already scarce. One of the most emotionally crushing burdens was the steady stream of death notifications from the front. For many families, the telegram became a symbol of dread. Women wrote about the moment they heard the knock at the door, the sound that made their hearts stop. Some described collapsing upon reading that their husbands or sons had been killed. Others wrote of numb disbelief, unable to process the news. Letters to close friends and relatives revealed the depth of this grief, sleepless nights, overwhelming loneliness, and the struggle to explain loss to children who could not fully grasp death. Widows faced not only emotional devastation, but also practical hardship. Many were thrust into the role of sole providers, managing the household, caring for children, and navigating a bureaucratic system that promised support but often delivered little. Letters described the frustration of waiting for pensions, dealing with unhelpful officials, and confronting societal expectations that widowed women remained stoic symbols of sacrifice. Privately, however, many expressed deep despair and fear about their uncertain futures. As the war crept closer to German soil, rumors of atrocities committed on the Eastern Front filtered home. While censorship and propaganda tightly controlled information, some women wrote about whispered stories shared among soldiers on leave. Their letters hint at growing anxiety, not only for their loved ones fighting abroad, but also for what might await Germany if the tides of war turned. These fears grew stronger as refugees from the East poured in, bringing accounts of violence, displacement, and advancing Soviet forces. Women living in smaller towns or villages near advancing fronts experienced the war's proximity firsthand. Letters describe the haunting sight of wounded soldiers transported through their towns, the sound of artillery in the distance, and the unsettling presence of military police enforcing increasingly desperate measures. Some women witnessed forced marches of prisoners or foreign laborers, events they mentioned only cautiously in their letters, aware of the risks of speaking too openly. Political pressure also intensified. The Nazi regime, desperate to maintain control, doubled down on propaganda, urging total loyalty and sacrifice. Women were encouraged or coerced into volunteering for civil defense, working longer hours, or participating in morale-boosting events. Yet private letters reveal mounting cynicism. Many women expressed quiet disbelief at official claims of imminent victory, especially as destruction increased and resources dwindled. They wrote about tuning out speeches, ignoring slogans, and relying instead on their own instincts to navigate daily life. Despite the overwhelming darkness of these years, women's letters also capture moments of profound humanity. Neighbors shared food, opened their homes to the displaced, or helped rebuild damaged shelters. Women wrote about comforting strangers, adopting orphaned children, or risking themselves to help the elderly escape collapsing buildings. These acts of compassion formed the emotional backbone of communities collapsing under the weight of war. Religious faith became an anchor for many. Women wrote about gathering secretly for prayer, seeking solace in scripture, or lighting candles for loved ones. For some, faith offered strength. For others, it raised painful questions about suffering, guilt, and divine justice. Letters revealed both deepened spirituality and crisis of belief, a duality shaped by the intensity of their circumstances. Mental and emotional strain reached breaking points for many women. Letters from this period include confessions of panic attacks, nightmares, and chronic anxiety, though they rarely used modern terminology. Instead, they wrote about restless hearts, shaking hands, and a heaviness that does not lift. Some women described moments of near collapse, hidden behind forced calm for the sake of their families. Yet even in these moments, their determination to endure shines through. By 1944, the war had touched every aspect of home life. Women's letters from this period read like a collective cry of exhaustion and fear, yet they also highlight extraordinary strength. Through their words, we witness a society unraveling, buildings destroyed, families broken, and hope stretched thin, but also the extraordinary resilience of women who held households, communities, and emotional worlds together, even as everything around them crumbled. By 1944, the struggle for survival had become the core of daily life for German women. Their letters from this period offer an intimate, often heartbreaking glimpse into a world where hardship, danger, and moral conflict intersected with extraordinary acts of courage. As the war neared its devastating conclusion, women found themselves navigating scarcity, political oppression, collapsing social structures, and the crushing emotional burden of loss. Yet, amid this turmoil, many also engaged in small, quiet forms of resistance, acts that, while not always overt or organized, expressed defiance against fear, oppression, and despair. Survival in the final years of the war meant confronting severe shortages in food, medicine, clothing, and nearly every essential. Ration cards offered only bare minimums, and even those allocations were rarely met. Letters show women anxiously planning meals with almost nothing to work with, stretching a few potatoes across several days, boiling cabbage until it dissolved into thin broth, or trading heirloom possessions on the black market for a few extra vegetables. They describe tightening belts, both symbolically and literally, as weight loss became widespread. Some women admitted fainting from hunger. Others wrote about children crying themselves to sleep with empty stomachs. The emotional toll of watching loved ones suffer from malnutrition weighed heavily on mothers, who often skipped their own meals to feed their children. Medical care became increasingly scarce. Women wrote about treating illnesses with herbal remedies, old remedies passed down through generations, or makeshift solutions born of desperation. Doctors and nurses were overwhelmed, hospitals were destroyed or overcrowded, and many medicines were unavailable. Letters speak of fevers that lasted for days because antibiotics were unobtainable, of infections treated with salt water or cloth bandages boiled and reused. For mothers caring for infants, the absence of proper nutrition or hygiene supplies was terrifying. Yet, even in these conditions, many women formed informal support networks, sharing remedies, caring for each other's children, and organizing neighborhood watch groups to ensure no one faced illness alone. Despite these challenges, survival was not merely physical. Women also endured profound psychological strain. Letters speak of relentless fear, fear of bombings, fear of advancing armies, fear of political retribution, fear for the fate of their loved ones. Many women described sleepless nights, uncontrollable shaking, and emotional numbness. They often concealed their distress from their families, fearing that any show of weakness might worsen morale. Yet on paper, in private letters to trusted confidants, they allowed themselves to be honest. These writings reveal a deep well of anxiety, grief, and exhaustion that simmered beneath the surface of everyday resilience. As Germany's military position deteriorated, political control tightened. Women wrote about increased surveillance, frequent checks by local officials, and mandatory participation in propaganda efforts. Some described feeling trapped in a society where even an offhand complaint could lead to punishment. Yet censorship and fear did not silence them completely. Letters show women subtly expressing dissent through coded language, metaphors, or omissions. They critiqued leadership, questioned the point of continued fighting, and expressed sympathy for people suffering under German occupation, sometimes at personal risk. These small acts of truth-telling formed a quiet undercurrent of resistance that history often overlooks. More organized resistance also appeared in certain households. Some women sheltered deserters, hid people fleeing persecution, or passed along forbidden information heard through underground networks or foreign radio broadcasts. Their letters, written cautiously and often without explicit detail, hint at these activities through references to guests requiring secrecy, tasks that could not be discussed openly, or news that brought both hope and fear. Many of these acts were driven not by ideology, but by humanity, an instinctive refusal to accept cruelty or injustice, even when surrounded by it. Women also resisted emotionally by rejecting the narratives imposed upon them. In letters to friends, they mocked propaganda slogans, dismissed promises of last-minute victory, and expressed growing disillusionment with leaders who appeared increasingly disconnected from reality. Their private writings often describe a sense of betrayal, anger that their loved ones were sent to die in a war that now seemed hopeless, resentment at the indifference of officials who enjoyed privileges denied to ordinary families, and bitterness that the sacrifices demanded of them seemed endless and unrewarded. For many women, resistance took the form of protecting their families from moral degradation. They avoided participating in denunciations, refrained from exploiting vulnerable forced laborers, and showed compassion to those suffering around them. Some formed bonds with foreign laborers working on nearby farms or in local factories, exchanging food, stories, or small acts of kindness. These gestures, though dangerous, affirmed their humanity at a time when society encouraged division and cruelty. Another significant aspect of survival was maintaining emotional and cultural identity. Women used music, reading, prayer, and storytelling to preserve a sense of dignity and normalcy. Letters describe evenings spent singing lullabies during blackouts, reading old family books to distract from hunger pangs, or gathering with neighbors to share stories from childhood. These acts became emotional sanctuaries, a way to hold on to hope when everything around them was collapsing. Friendships played an essential role during this period. Letters depict friendships as lifelines, sources of comfort, humor, and mutual support. Women leaned on each other for advice, shared resources, and carried each other's burdens. These bonds often deepened through shared suffering. In some cases, friendships took on the role of surrogate families for widows, refugees, or women whose relatives were missing in action. Letters between close female friends are filled with tenderness, honesty, and the kind of emotional intimacy rarely expressed openly in daily life. As Allied armies advanced, especially from the east, fear for physical safety reached a critical peak. Women wrote terrified letters about the rumors of violence, retribution, and chaos spreading from town to town. Some fled with their children in desperate attempts to reach safer areas, often traveling through dangerous terrain or crowded refugee routes. Others stayed behind to protect elderly relatives or homes, writing letters filled with dread about what the next days or weeks might bring. Their words capture the sense of living on the edge of catastrophe, where survival depended as much on luck as on strength. In these final months of the war, survival and resistance became intertwined. To survive was to resist losing hope, losing dignity, or losing compassion. Women's letters show that even amid fear and deprivation, they refused to surrender completely to despair. They cooked, cared, comforted, protected, and even laughed when they could. Small acts that kept life moving forward. Their endurance was a form of resistance in itself. These letters reveal that resistance is not always loud or heroic. Sometimes it is the quiet act of telling the truth. Sometimes it is sharing a piece of bread with a stranger. Sometimes it is hiding tears so children feel safe. And sometimes it is refusing to give up even when the world is collapsing. Through their words, German women of this era show us what it means to hold on to humanity in a time of darkness. The final months of the war brought a mixture of despair, disbelief, and exhausted relief to German women who had lived through 6 relentless years of upheaval. Their letters, written in trembling handwriting on scraps of paper, torn diary pages, or whatever could be found, reflected a world collapsing around them, cities in ruins, families scattered, and a nation reckoning with consequences it could neither escape nor fully understand. Women wrote not only to husbands at the front, many of whom would never read their words, but also to children evacuated to the countryside, to sisters living miles away, or to friends they had not seen in years. Each letter embodied a fragment of a disintegrating world, capturing the emotional turbulence of an era drawing to a violent close. By 1944 and early 1945, Allied bombing campaigns had turned major German cities into hollowed-out shells. Women described once familiar streets transformed into collapsed beams, scorched brick, and clouds of ash that hung in the air for days. "Our house is gone," wrote one mother, "and with it the cradle, the letters, the pictures, everything that made our life ours." Families moved from cellar to cellar, sometimes living with strangers or distant relatives, bound together by circumstance. In many letters, women expressed confusion and fear, not only for their physical safety, but for what future might await them after the war. They worried about food shortages, about finding work, and about how to raise children in a world so altered by violence. The collapse of the Eastern Front brought another kind of terror. As Soviet forces advanced, women from East Prussia, Silesia, and Pomerania fled in massive waves, writing hurried letters that described frozen roads, overcrowded carts, and the harrowing fear of assault. Some letters never reached their destinations. Others survived only because they were tucked into coat linings or hidden in wooden chests. These testimonies reveal not just the chaos of the evacuation, but the emotional devastation of leaving behind homes that had been part of families for generations. "I do not know if I will ever see the orchard again," one woman wrote, "but I carried the smell of the apple blossoms with me." With Germany's surrender came a new period of uncertainty. The occupying forces brought rules and restructuring that reshaped daily life. Women wrote of navigating new authorities, ration systems, and curfews. Yet amid the hardship, some felt a fragile sense of hope. Communities began to rebuild from rubble, brick by brick, neighbor with neighbor. Schools reopened, markets returned, and humanitarian aid offered glimpses of a more stable future. Women's letters described the relief of peace mixed with the burden of confronting what the war had wrought, including the moral reckoning that many struggled to articulate. The aftermath also marked the moment when families confronted the truth of their losses. Letters returned unopened from the military mail service confirmed deaths or disappearances long feared. Widows wrote to sisters and friends, seeking comfort and recounting final memories of their husbands. Mothers wrote about sons who would never come home. These letters, filled with grief but also resilience, became a way to process the incomprehensible. Some described joining church groups or community organizations to find purpose, while others focused on rebuilding family life as best they could. Despite all the devastation, many women sought to anchor themselves in the idea of renewal. They planted gardens in the shells of bombed courtyards, taught children to read using salvaged books, and formed new social networks that would eventually help shape post-war German society. Their letters reveal an enduring determination to rebuild, not just homes and cities, but also identities and moral frameworks shaken by years of conflict. We must start again, not as we were, but as we can